Hello and welcome to Cut Through the Noise. Cut Through the Noise is the podcast that helps business leaders increase sales through elevated communications and marketing. I'm your host, Aisling O'Rourke, the founder of The Communications Coach, based here in the Republic of Ireland. I work with business leaders who want to communicate with confidence, credibility and clarity, both internally and externally. I hope you've had the opportunity for some rest and relaxation over the festive period. I know, though, for many of us, these breaks can feel far too short. So I do hope that you got some time to rest and reflect. For a lot of business owners, the end of year doesn't really bring a full stop, but instead a pause and sometimes not even that. And that's why in the last episode of Cut Through the Noise, we talked about the importance of reflection on the year just gone, not to dwell on it, but to create a stronger foundation for the year ahead. You see, I believe that reflection, when done well, isn't indulgent. Instead, it's strategic. It gives you perspective, and perspective is essential if you want to lead with clarity into 2026. We're now at the start of a new calendar year, and this is a useful moment to pause and take stock, to recognise all that you've achieved, and even when progress perhaps felt slow or stalled, it's worth acknowledging the small wins that will build momentum over time. The moments where you as a company showed resilience, adaptability, and leadership, often quietly without recognition. It's all too easy to get really busy with working on the day to day. And it's very important, I feel, at the start of a new calendar year to really take that balcony or pilot approach and really look at where the business is at and all that you've achieved so far. It's also very important to honestly look at what didn't work, the projects that stalled, the decisions that drained energy, perhaps the clients that turned out not to be the right fit. Once you look at the approaches that once served you well but now feel misaligned, it gives you a place to acknowledge patterns and then look at making better decisions going forward. Over time, all businesses evolve, and what once served you well may no longer fit. And that's why in the previous episode, I shared why I like to use the Gibbs reflective cycle for this process. I like it because it provides structure when reflection can otherwise feel vague or overwhelming. The Gibbs reflective cycle moves us through what happened, how it felt, what you learned, and crucially, what we can do differently next time around. So if you haven't yet had the opportunity to listen to our last episode, I would encourage you to go back and really dig into it, because I feel it helps set us up and set up much of the mindset that we will need heading into 2026. As I record this episode, I am very aware that many business owners are tired. Not necessarily tired energy-wise, but tired of reacting. Tired of feeling like we're constantly responding and on call to emails, algorithms, messages, WhatsApp, voice notes, deadlines, and expectations that never quite slow down. I hear this all the time in my work as a communications and media coach. People will say things to me like, I know my communications could be better, or I know my marketing is not as consistent as it should be, but I just can't seem to get on top of it. There's this sense of always being behind, even when we're very busy and working very hard. Unfortunately, we live in a world where uncertainty has become a constant. Economic pressures, technological changes, and artificial intelligence evolving at speed have all contributed to this feeling or sense of constantly being in a state of flux. And yet, in the middle of all of this, businesses are still expected to show up clearly, consistently, and credibly. And that's not easy to do without structure. So that's why in this season of Cut Through the Noise, we're focusing in on one core idea, and that is setting your business up with the communications and marketing systems you need to lead in 2026. It's not about louder marketing, not about making even more content, but instead about building better foundations. When I talk about communication systems, I'm not talking about the tools in themselves alone. I'm talking about how decisions are made, about what you say and when, how messaging is shaped, approved, and shared, how your team communicates, particularly when things get busy or people feel under pressure, and how consistently your business shows up externally, regardless of what else is going on. So, a useful starting question at the start of this calendar year is, who owns communications in your business? You see, I often work with organizations where everyone's work touches on communications, but no one truly owns it. Social media might be handled by one person, email marketing somebody else, internal updates by somewhere else entirely. And that creates an unclear, uncertain system. In fact, it's not a system at all, it's ad hoc. And consistency suffers. When consistency suffers, trust is eroded slowly and steadily, and that hurts the bottom line. At the end of the day, we're running businesses, not hobbies. In 2026, the businesses that will stand out will not be the ones chasing every new trend ad hoc. They will instead be the clearest, clear on who they serve, clear on what they stand for and what values they're aligned with, clear on how they communicate even when circumstances change. From my work as a communications coach and from conversations we've had on Cut Through the Noise over the years, I see the same pattern again and again. Marketing becomes reactive, communications becomes last minute, and clarity is something people hope will emerge rather than something they are intentionally designing. And that approach is not sustainable. Your communications strategy needs to be strategic. It needs to be intentionally designed. So let me give you a practical example. I worked recently with a business that was very active online. They were posting regularly, sending out newsletters, showing up at events. And on the surface, they looked really busy and successful, and you could argue had strong visibility. But when we stepped back and took that pilot approach, there was no clear narrative. Different messages were being shared by different people with great intentions, but without alignment. The result was confusion in what the business was actually doing, what services it was offering, and what it stood for. So once we introduced some simple communications frameworks by defining key messages, looking at our tone, priorities for the year ahead, and ownership, everything becomes easier. Content creation now becomes less time, and instead of panicking that we've nothing to post this week, instead we had a pool of ideas that we were constantly drawing from. Decision making became faster because it was very clear what needed to be said and done. And most importantly, the business overall feels much more confident in how it shows up online and in the real world. And that's the power of systems. Over the next 6 weeks, this series will explore what it really means to build communications and marketing systems that support your business rather than drain it. We will look at AI and regulation and influence and visibility. We look at communications and sustainable marketing practices, always through a practical lens. For today, I'd like to leave you with 3 foundational ideas that you can begin applying straight away. I'd like to encourage you to listen with a pen and paper nearby to revisit these ideas later so that they are something that you can actually practically work through, not something that you just listen to and, yeah, I'll think about it later. So first up, we have to think about communications as infrastructure. Just like finance or operations, communications needs planning, ownership, and review. And if communication is only happening when there's a problem, a crisis, or a new product launch, you don't have a system. You need to take a practical approach to your communications and build a system. So, first things first, we need to schedule at minimum a quarterly review and communications check in. Then we look at action points and tasks on a monthly and weekly basis. Set aside an hour a week to look at what you're communicating and to whom and what needs to be tackled in this particular week. And then every quarter, you can look back at what worked in the previous quarter and then what needs to be done in the quarter ahead. You have to ask a couple of questions. What's working? What's not working? What feels forced? And what no longer aligns with your business priorities? One client I worked with on this particular process realized that they were spending time promoting services they no longer wanted to lead with. The business had grown beyond the services that they were marketing. That single insight allowed them to refocus their messaging and free up much needed energy for the business overall. Secondly, consistency builds trust more than creativity alone. Now, don't get me wrong, creativity matters. It brings personality and warmth to your communications, but consistency is what helps people understand you, remember you, and trust you. So there must be consistency in your communications strategy. And one simple thing is we're at the start of a new year where I know that in 2026, many of us will be seeking out offline events to go to and network in because for many people, there's too much screen time. And this gives us an opportunity to practice our communications in the real world. And I'd like to get you to think about how you're introducing yourself at these networking events. Are you using the one tried, tested, adapted introduction at networking events? Some would call it the elevator pitch. I prefer to think of it as the opening to a conversation. But are you using something that you do know works, that you have actually tested out and aligns with what you're currently doing and what you're trying to grow? Or is it ad hoc and as a result confused? Basically, are you telling one person one bit of the business and someone else another bit of the business and it doesn't quite marry up? It's a really useful exercise. Sit back and think about it because I know there'll be loads of events coming up for many of us to attend in 2026. Another useful exercise here is conducting your own audit of your website, your social media, your emails, and internal updates. Are they telling the same story about who you and the business are, what you offer, and how to get in contact with you, how you want to be booked? Can I book a discovery call immediately on your website, for example, or do I need to email you that? That consistency is important because if I Google you or search for you using an AI tool and I'm seeing confused messaging, then I'm not so sure I can trust that you're doing what you claim that you can do. Consistency doesn't mean repetition, it means alignment. And alignment comes from systems and not light bulb moment inspiration. I often ask clients that if they disappear for a week or two, would their communications still make sense without you? Or do you feel the need to constantly explain them? And if you feel the need to constantly explain them, that means you don't have a system in place or that the system that you're using is relying far too much on individual effort. So we really do need to look at that system and make sure that we have one in place so that we can take, like I said at the start of this episode, much needed rest when the time comes. And third for today, I want you to think about preparedness over prediction. You cannot possibly know what exactly is going to happen in 2026. None of us can. But what we do need is a clear understanding of how the business will communicate when things change, because we know that things will change. We need an overall plan for what we want to do in 2026 and how we want to communicate that to our target audience. So A simple but powerful exercise here is to outline how you would communicate in 3 separate scenarios: growth, disruption, and change. Who speaks? What's the priority message? How quickly do you respond? Even sketching this out informally builds confidence and reduces panic when unexpected situations arise. It's also a good point in time to go back and look at your crisis communications plan. I have had a previous episode on the podcast about the importance of having a crisis communications plan, but you also need to ensure that it is up to date and ready for 2026, because this level of preparedness is not about control, it's about leadership. And if you want to be considered as a thought leader, as a company leader, then you need to act like one. So I'd like to take a moment to invite you to pause for a moment and reflect on your own business. Are you reacting rather than deciding? Where are communications happening by default rather than by design? And would it feel easier if there was more structure in place? If this resonates with you, I'd invite you to reflect on one simple question. If nothing changed externally, would your communications still be clear, consistent, and credible? And if the answer to that is no, it's not a failure, it's an opportunity. And that's why we are designing this series with you in mind, to help you think differently about how you communicate and to give you practical insights that you can apply immediately. If you're ready to work in a supported and structured way, if you would be interested in teasing out these issues in a monthly mastermind, then you can book a discovery call with me to explore the Clarity Collective. This is a no pressure conversation where we can discuss whether the Clarity Collective is the right fit for you, or if you'd rather something more one-to-one and personal communications coaching. To find out more, you can email me on hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie or visit thecommunicationscoach.ie. As always, all of those links are in the show notes. I hope that today's episode has resonated with you and that you're excited and looking ahead with hope and optimism for 2026. If you've any questions about the ideas that I've discussed in today's episode, please feel free, drop me a line again, hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. I would be delighted to have a chat with you about it. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please do give us a 5-star rating on your preferred podcast app. And it also helps if you could share it with friends, colleagues, and networks that you're a part of, because the more people that know about Cut Through the Noise and listen to each and every episode helps us continue to keep the podcast on the road each and every week. Thank you very much for listening. I wish you a happy, positive, and aligned year ahead. Remember that it's a noisy world, and that clear, confident, and authentic communication is what allows you and your business to cut through the noise.